Okay, going live now.
מה איתך? איך אתה מרגיש?
תודה לאל, הכל בסדר.
איזה כיף לראות אותך, אבא.
איזה כיף לראות אותך. לראות אתכם זה תרופה.
יותר טוב מתרופה.
Good evening. I am Bruce Braffman, Treasurer
and Vice President of Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey, and proud co-chair of tonight's program with my colleague, Rena Donenschlussel, who is VP of Planning and Allocations. Welcome, and I'm so happy you're able to attend this important program. We are very fortunate to have two prestigious and revered rabbis with us today, discussing a topic that is meaningful to many of us. Making Aliyah is a very personal decision, and many of us know friends, family, or neighbors who have made the decision to move to Israel. But then what happens? How does making Aliyah impact the relationship between Israelis and Jews in the diaspora? Tonight, Rabbi Golden and Rabbi Rothrax will explore the topic and provide some personal insights and experiences. Before we begin the program, I want to take a moment to talk to you about Federation. Federation's work is vast and impactful. Often it is difficult to explain all that Federation does in one conversation. It may be about feeding seniors, fighting anti-Semitism, helping build Jewish identity, advocating with law enforcement and elected officials, or supporting local agencies and day schools, caring for the most vulnerable in our community. Federation has the bird's eye view of the Jewish communal needs and can allocate resources and work with partner agencies as needs emerge. No other organization in our community can do that. During the pandemic, Federation has been working very hard to keep our community connected despite the need for physical distancing. Federation has offered over 40 virtual events on a broad range of topics. We look forward to the day when we will be able to meet together in person. But until then, you can count on Federation for programming and engagement opportunities. In response to COVID, Federation has already allocated over $500,000 to the community for senior meals, PPE, funds for economic support, mental health services, as well as food for pantries. We have numerous meetings with our New Jersey legislators to make sure that the needs of our nursing homes, seniors, disabled, and school children are not forgotten in the budgeting process. But as ever, we rely on you to make all of this possible. If you have already made a donation to Federation, thank you. If you haven't made one yet, please go to jfnnj.org/donate to make a difference. The needs of the community are significant and growing. Please help. One thing on a personal note, I know that the RCBC and Rabbi Golden in particular, I'm sure Rabbi Rothrax, have been major supporters of Federation. Every year, we bring to the attention of our congregation at Avos Torah the needs of Federation, and they respond generously. And I hope every congregation throughout Bergen County also responds as well. I am now thrilled to introduce you and talk to you a bit about our presenters. Rarely do I have a personal relationship with one of our speakers. Rabbi Shmuel Golden has been my rabbi, spiritual advisor, and friend for more than 40 years. We met when we were 3 years old, obviously. Rabbi Golden served for over 3 decades as the senior rabbi of Congregation Avos Torah in Englewood, and currently continues as the congregation's rabbi emeritus and visiting scholar. A past president of the Rabbinical Council of America, Rabbi Golden is the author of a popular 5-volume series on the Torah, Unlocking the Torah Text, and has recently published Unlocking the Haggadah. Both texts provided me new insights and are must-reads. Often people say they read them. I read every single word, and amazingly, they sound just like Rabbi Golden's sermons. So it's actually Rabbi Golden speaking you through the text. It's wonderful. I was the last serving Avos Torah president before 2017, when Rabbi Golden and his wife Barbara made Aliyah in 2017 to Jerusalem, Israel, where he continues to teach, write, and speak. Rabbi Pupko is a worthy successor, but Rabbi Golden will always be my rabbi. I do not have a personal relationship with Rabbi Larry Rothrax. He has served as rabbi at Congregation Beth Aaron in Teaneck, New Jersey since August 2002. The rabbi taught Talmud at various yeshivot, and he currently serves as head rabbi of Camp Marashah. In April 2016, he was appointed director of professional rabbinics at REITs, where future rabbis look to him as a role model of what it means to balance the spiritual, social, and emotional needs of a large suburban kahila. Rabbi Rothrax has served as president of the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County and on the executive committee of the Rabbinical Council of America. In May 2016, he was named by the Jewish Forward among America's most inspiring rabbis. I felt I needed a personal contact, so I reached out to Rabbi Pupko, and he had only the most wonderful things to say about Rabbi Rothwax. He said, throughout the crisis, Rabbi Rothwax has been a model for other rabbis and how reaching out to congregants and creating dynamic programming can be achieved. As we commence their respective talks, both Rabbi Golden and Rabbi Rothwax are happy to take questions. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and the questions will be shared with the rabbis. I now turn it over. Please enjoy this evening.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you for that wonderful and generous introduction. At least the first introduction was accurate. And it is a great personal honor on so many levels to have an opportunity to sit, albeit virtually, together with Rabbi Golden, who is a personal friend, a colleague, but perhaps more importantly, a mentor to myself and so many of my colleagues, which I guess will be the starting point, because I know we really want to get right into things tonight so we can have a comprehensive and substantive conversation. Rabbi Golden, you served at the helm of one of the most established synagogues, communities, really in North America. You led with exceptional qualities of leadership, and for many of us, I know I speak for myself and many of my colleagues, we would have expected to see Rabbi Golden perhaps continue to serve his community, and by extension, really communities all over North America for at least another decade, if not two. And while Aliyah is a personal decision for everyone, and yes, even a rabbi and his family, I guess I would want to begin tonight by asking you, and forgive me if this is abrupt, but right out of the gate over here, not so much why did you make Aliyah, although feel free to reflect on that as well, but why now and why then, given the fact that you were really, at the prime of your career, continuing, to provide so much, as you just heard Bruce reflect so personally in terms of what you mean to himself, and I'm sure so many countless others. So maybe you could share a little bit with us about the decision and how you came to make Aliyah, and what inspired you, particularly at this time in your life. Rabbi Golden, yeah, unmute yourself. There you go. Good.
All right. First of all, I'd like to thank Bruce and Rabbi Rothwax for the wonderful, wonderful introductions and compliments. Really, it warms my heart to see you all and to see you and to participate with you, Bruce, and Rabbi Rothwax, to have an opportunity to share the podium with you. It's a tough question, but in my case, it's fairly simple. The answer is my wife. I think when it comes to Aliyah, I have found in the case with many couples that it's one member of the couple that is the primary mover and the one who's really pushing in a particular direction, and apparently towards the land of Israel. And what happened in our case was we took a sabbatical, I'd say I guess it was about 14 years ago, and I signed a long-term contract with the shul, and I made a deal with my wife that after that contract was over, but when I arrived at about age 65, that we would make Aliyah at that point. As that date grew near, my feet became colder and colder. As you say, I felt I was in the prime of my career. I felt that I was enjoying very much being the rabbi of Avas Torah and playing a role in the Jewish community as a whole. And I also cherished and continue to cherish the very wonderful relationships that I had with many of our friends and many of the congregants within the shul. So I turned to Barbara and I said, you know, really, I'm not sure that I want to do this right now. Well, that didn't fall on good ears. My wife turned to me and said, listen, you know, you made a deal. I'm also telling you that it's the time to go. She said, you don't want to stay past the turning point where you're a little bit too old to continue to lead a young growing congregation. You want to leave at a point where someone else can take over who's got perhaps a little more energy and a little more vision at this point. My children turned to me and said, Abba, you want to leave while most of the people still want you to stay. And it was their push, really, that moved us to make the decision to go on Aliyah. It was a difficult one. It was very hard for me personally. It continues to have its moments where I think back on perhaps what I could have continued to do, but at the same time, I have to say they were right. We left at the right time. We left at a point where the feelings were very, very warm between us and the community. It was a warm farewell. And at the same time, I left at a point where I could continue to contribute and still have enough energy to contribute within the Israeli community and the world community, I hope. So that's pretty much it. I was pushed, but they were right.
Well, thank you. That's a fair answer. Perhaps you know, Barbara and Chaviva, that's my wife. For those who don't know, can spend a little time together, maybe later this evening or tomorrow, the latest. And who knows? But I could certainly understand that. Appreciate it's actually very inspiring, and we appreciate your honesty. But now that you've been there for 3 years, even though you're taking you know, the summer off and you're with us here, you know, I think you've been there long enough to get a sense of what it's really like to be an Israeli citizen, having made that transition, which I'm sure, you know, has many challenges, as you referred to. Perhaps you can share with us if there are any, I guess, really important lessons, perspectives, new understandings of yourself, the community here or there, that you couldn't appreciate fully or at all before having made that transition. And perhaps, you know, to the extent that we can, at least on this side of the ocean, gain some insight, inspiration through whatever realizations you've had over the past few years.
I could go on and on. You know, one of the things that I've learned is that we really don't understand Israel until you're living in Israel. And I say this as a rabbi, as you know, all of us have taken trips to Israel and missions to Israel and felt we understood it. And if you don't mind, I'm going to tell you, I'll tell you a story that to me sums up what I've learned about Israel. It was a story that I've shared with my community. It happened fairly soon after our Aliyah. There's a lot of red tape, and there are things you have to get used to. And one of the things we needed to do was go to the Misrad Hapnim. We had to go to the Interior Ministry to be able to do some paperwork. And we knew there was a long line in the Interior Ministry in the center of the city, so we decided to go to the Interior Ministry in Har Choma. We got on the bus, and my wife turned to the bus driver and said, could you please tell us in Hebrew how to get to the Interior Ministry in Har Choma, Ministry of the Interior? And he said, Lo yodea, I don't know. My wife said to him, Lo yodea, how could you not know? You're the bus driver. He said, Lo yodea, I don't know. That would have ended the entire event, except the lady in the front row sitting on the other side turned to him and said, Eichata lo yodea, and started to scream at him and said, how could you possibly not know? You're the bus driver. Bus driver said, I don't know. At that point, the lady stood up, turned around, and addressing the entire bus said, does anybody know how to get to the Interior Ministry at Har Choma? These poor people don't know how to get there. All this, of course, unfolding in Israel. At that point, the bus driver stopped the bus in the middle of the street, started screaming, what do you want from me? This is my first day. The place broke down into catcalls, and I crawled to the back of my seat. It was at that point that I realized one truth. And I say this a lot when I talk to people about Israel. It's not a country. It's a family. It's a family with all the function and dysfunction that you find in families. Where else would an entire bus get involved in trying to help a couple that's trying to find a place to the interior ministry? I mean, it happened with a little bit of cacophony, but they were really trying to help.
Uh-oh. Looks like Rabbi Golden is frozen.
They'll be the first ones to push you down on the line, but they'll also be the first ones to pick you up when you fall. And that's the way I see it.
Thank you. You froze for the last 30 seconds or so of your comment. You froze,
Okay.
but I was thinking, and perhaps you just said this. It's ironic because Israelis often get, you know, a bad rap. You know, we like to think of ourselves as being in some ways a little more refined and personable. But at the end of the day, as you point out correctly, when you're with family, you know, sometimes people speak what's on their mind and don't necessarily say please and thank you. But there is a certain sense of connection and belonging that one feels in Israel that is not to be assumed or taken for granted, even, you know, as we are so fortunate to live in such a wonderful country.
It allows me to raise a question to you. Have you ever considered Aliyah? Is that something that you would consider for yourself or your family? And and this was a sacrifice for me, would you be willing to give up the role that you now play? And in my estimation, it's a growing role, clearly within the Yeshiva University community, within your own community, within the world Jewish community. Would you be willing to give that up at some time?
An excellent question. I have no idea how many of my own constituents are listening right now, so I have to be very careful how I answer the question. Knowing, of course, that depending on who they are, you know, they may want to hear a different answer. The answer is that it really depends on the day. Rabbi Golden, you referred to memories that you have of shul missions. It's been quite a number of years since we took our shul on missions, although there were at least 3 or 4 that I could recall in the earlier years. And those moments, for myself personally, I know for everybody who joined, were so incredibly impactful and transformative. They were so incredibly inspiring, and really very early on in my career, it was a real crisis for me. It was a crisis on many levels, because I recognized at that point in my life, when my kids were, you know, much younger, that if I was going to do it, you know, now would be the time. And then I think what happened was I came back and I would preach and teach a lot about the importance of Aliyah. I guess I was so good at it that so many of my Balabatim listened to me. I don't have the data to prove this, but I have a hunch that that proportionally our shul may have the zchus of having sent more families in Aliyah than any other shul that I know of. I think it's somewhere about 17% of the members of my shul have made Aliyah in the past 18 years since I've been there. And I'm not counting the children of our members who have, you know, gone off to learn in yeshiva and join the army and never came back. And that, you know, there's a significant number there as well. And here I am, as you heard, you know, almost 18 years later, also feeling somewhat comfortable and fulfilled. And perhaps more importantly, you know, feeling that, you know, while some days are better than ever, that I'm accomplishing something here. And I consider, when I visit either my own children, whatever the case may be, an occasional trip to Israel, the prospects of living there, with all the wonderful things that come along with that, you know, I do wonder, you know, where will that leave me personally, professionally, and if so, you know, to what extent, you know, should that inform my decision? And the way I answer that question, like I said, it really depends on the day. For all I know, it has to do with what I had for breakfast that morning. but there are times that I feel extremely certain and passionate that this is something that we really need to do and do soon. I'm not going to lie, over the past 5 months, together with probably anybody else who's listening right now, we've thought about that perhaps, a little more thoughtfully and seriously than perhaps we had in the past few years. But then I remind myself where I am and what it is that Baruch Hashem we are able to do here. And I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. So,
You know, listening to you, I'm sure that it's not just I'm sure that I'm not the only one resonating to that conflict, but many of the listeners are resonating as well. In other words, the truth is that those moments we visited Israel as visitors were very powerful moments. And I have to admit, as an Oleh, that those moments are not going to happen every single day. And yet at the same time, being there will surprise you in ways you never expected. And just feeling that you're part of a story that's unfolding in a very beautiful and important way. At the same time, I understand exactly what you're saying. You're doing work here and you need to remain here. It's not a decision for everyone. It's not a decision for everyone. It's a tough decision to make. I don't only think rabbis struggle with it. I think everybody does. And we all resonate to that honest appraisal. I thank you for it.
Rabbi Golden, one of the many qualities that you have that has really always impressed me, and I'm not just saying it, I would say it to anyone in any other setting, even if you weren't on my mind, your ability to connect with so many different types of people, all different backgrounds, value systems, people of different faith, and you know, you have been in that regard, I think, you know, an exceptional leader who has yet to be replaced here in Bergen County. And so therefore, I'm wondering, as someone who connected so meaningfully with so many people here in America, and again, I know that you're still sort of getting your feet wet. You've only been in Israel for 3 years, but I think you've been there long enough to get a real sense of what's sort of going on under the hood, and to connect in perhaps a more meaningful way than you would have been able to as a tourist with your average Israeli citizen neighbor, you know, the bus driver, whether it's his first day or his, you know, or the day he's retiring. And I'm wondering, you know, do you perceive that there's, you know, any real gap between these two communities in terms of the way we think, the way we feel, in terms of our values, our dreams? And if so, is that a problem? And if it is a problem, you know, is there anything that we should be doing to address it?
It's a terrific question. I'm glad you're asking. I think it's moving us into an area of discussion that's of critical importance. We don't understand each other. I think it's the best way to start. That the two communities, having lived now in the States and played a role in the States and now living in Israel, even though I will admit that when you move to Israel, depending on where you move, you may find yourself in a bit of a bubble, and your immediate contacts may be the American community or this community or that community. You do get a sense of what's happening in Israel and what people are thinking about and what's on their minds. The American Jewish community and the Israeli community are vastly different, and their daily concerns, and that's what you have to start with. You have to start with that understanding that the daily concerns of these two communities are worlds apart. Imagine for a moment that you're not sitting at the table discussing which college your son or daughter is going to go to, or which sleepaway camp they're going to go to that particular year, but rather you're discussing which unit in the Army they're gonna enter, or when that entry will take place. You're no longer talking about, you see, and on the other hand, whereas Jews in America are concerned, oh, will my children continue to be Jewish? That's not an Israeli concern, right? They're not concerned about whether they continue to be Jewish. The question is whether or not they're going to continue to resonate to the values and the morals and the ideals that started the country, or whether those ideals are going to get watered down. There are so many huge differences in the experiences. I remember when I was in America, I thought everyone who wore a kippah sruga in Israel thought just like I did. And I come here and that's a knitted kippah. And I come here and I find you see people with knitted kippot who think totally differently than you do in terms of religious outlook, in terms of political outlook, in terms of things that concern them. The blast in Lebanon that took place for American Jewry is across the ocean. For Israeli Jewry is right next door. The things we resonate to, the concerns we have, the issues we have, the interdenominational issues that we have in America, which on some level are much less visible in Israel. And yet at the same time, you have this vast divide between not denominations, but between different kinds of Jews. Yeah. Imagine for a moment, and this is what we keep forgetting about, what Israel is doing and what it's tried to do over these past 70 some odd years. And that is, we're bringing family home from countries across the globe that have absolutely no real connection with each other and haven't seen each other for years. And we're trying to make a country out of them. We're trying to say, you know, Jews from Morocco, here meet the Jews from Berlin, you know, and sit down and come up with a way to elect a parliament, come up with a way to have a cabinet, come up with a way to a Knesset, right? Not a parliament. Come up with a way to determine who's gonna lead you and who's gonna take you. And we're this family, this huge family of people don't think alike. Ethiopian Jews, when they arrived to Israel, Ethiopian Jews thought the temple still stood. They were shocked to hear that there was no more, that the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, wasn't standing anymore. How do you take a group of Jews like that and integrate them into a community? These are the things that Israelis are thinking about. These are the things that are on their minds. And it's vastly different from not to minimize the concerns of American Jewry. Not at all. The concerns of American Jewry are, I lived with them for decades. They are real and they're sincere, and from tuition increases to will my kids be Jewish to what, but those concerns are just different. Once we can acknowledge the difference in our worlds, then we can begin to talk to each other and not try to impose our world on the other world. Right? Whether it's a political issue concerning the presidential election coming up in America, where you find vastly different points of view in both countries, whether it's other issues like denominational issues from America to Israel. We shouldn't try to impose the concerns that we have on Israel. We should try to figure out what are your concerns and how can we help you. We're family too. We may not be living together, but we're still all family. And we've got to figure out a way to work together.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see that there's a question that's been posted here, so I'll share it with you. A friend recently returned to Israel after being away for about 25 years, and she finds Israel today is very different in so many ways from the Israel of the past. Wondering if you can comment on this.
I don't know exactly what differences she's talking about because I, again, didn't live there 25 years ago, but I would imagine that she's 100% right. Things are changing. Every time there's a new Aliyah, every time somebody is coming, every time there's an influx from a particular country, every time as the generations move on, how do you continue to have the same kind of fervor and imagination that you had with the start and the birth of Eretz Yisrael? I remember once sitting with someone and, you know, talking to someone in the Department of Defense in Israel when we were dealing with Oslo, this and that, and questions. And he said, you know, the American Jews think we're still dancing and singing the Torah. You know, that spirit, how do you perpetuate that spirit? How do you transmit it? How does Bnei Akiva and teach the young Jews to be Zionistic? How do we perpetuate those concerns? The concerns that Israelis have today economically are very real. The concerns that each influx of immigration, each community has, are very real. And it's going to shift. It's going to shift again in the next 25 years. And the trick is going to be to hold this country together, to hold our family together, and to figure out how to keep it safe, how to keep it secure, and how to keep it thriving. I would only say one other thing again, and that is, in spite of all the complications that I mentioned, let's look at what Israel has achieved in these 7 years. Let's look at what Israel has contributed to the world during these years. It's an amazing thing. And that's in spite of the fractions and the factions and the differences and the points of view. You know, some Israelis say, you know, you mentioned that you speak about the fact that you've preached Aliyah. And I know you do, and I know you did, and clearly successfully. And it's an example for rabbis around the world. Do you think rabbis in general are comfortable speaking about Aliyah? And, you know, and I did as well. But how do you deal with the fact that you're preaching what you're not practicing at this point?
It's a good question. I mean, it's a question you could ask in general. I can only speak for myself. I have a difficult time preaching about things I don't practice. And I've shared with my Balabatim in the past that if you pay very, very close attention to what I talk about and what I don't talk about, over the course of years, you will be able to detect what I don't practice, because I'm not going to preach about it. And there are certain ideas and values and mitzvot that I'm able to preach more comfortably about. And then areas in which I personally struggle and I feel that my shortcomings are great, I find it more difficult. And unless there's a situation where it's a very pressing need, I will typically defer the topic again and again. When it comes to Aliyah, so the way I always framed it was twofold. Number one, I never felt that it was appropriate for me, regardless of where I live, to present the topic as if this is something that you as an individual must do. Rather to take a step back and to say that as a community, and again, not necessarily as a synagogue, and not even geographically as a community, but as a diaspora community living at this time in history, you know, we really have to answer for ourselves as to why we are here. And that's a question that we need to ask ourselves again and again and again. Because while I don't know, and I can't be certain one way or the other as to whether or not God will hold each and every one of us, or any of us for that matter, as individuals, responsible or accountable, perhaps a better word, for having not made Aliyah when we had an opportunity to do so. I do think when you take a step back and consider the opportunities that we as a nation have been offered, which was really the stuff of dreams for 2,000 years, and yet so many of us are still sitting here. The Nefesh B'Nefesh is an incredible organization. It's very inspiring to see what they've accomplished. The reality is that a very small percentage of North American Jewry has made Aliyah over the past 70 years. It's in the low single digits. Based on our own experiences, you wouldn't believe it. I just told you my own shul, we're seeing close to 20%. But if you take a real step back, I mean, and the question is why, how? The other point that I had made in the past was I asked people to consider, you know, as a long-term consideration, the idea that when the time comes and I am ready to retire and to move and to relocate, it doesn't have to be to Florida only. You know, and even if right now I can't see myself doing it, and let's be honest, many of us, we have some real pressing concerns and considerations which make it, you know, on a logistical level, maybe close to impossible, perhaps. But that doesn't mean that it's something that I can't plan for 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And even to begin the process by filling out a couple of forms, while, you know, you're not committing yourself to anything, you know, symbolically, and perhaps more than that, you're telling yourself, you know, maybe maybe one day. So, I mean, that's the way I always framed it. Like I said, whether it was just me or my good luck, too many people in my shul started listening to me. So several years ago, I just stopped pushing as hard. Although I will say, and maybe I'll segue into my next question, you know, many of my balabatim who made Aliyah would say on their way out, Rabbi, when are you coming? You know, when you come, we'll join you. Why don't you just go ahead and build a Beth Aaron in? You know, I've heard it many, many times. And I know it's coming from a good place and people are very sincere. I've never had the guts to say to anybody, okay, you know, you build it, I'll come. But of course, on a certain level, you know, that's always what I'm thinking. But I want to ask you, Rabbi Golden, you know, my observation is that, you know, one of the major differences between our community here, I would say here in Bergen County, this is really what I'm most familiar with, and virtually every community that I've seen in Israel, is that the shul, the synagogue, you know, plays such an important role in the life of its members, and it serves as a hub, you know, not just for davening throughout the weekend on Shabbos, but for life cycle events and for people to connect socially through various types of programming, which allows the rabbi to develop relationships with many of the members and allow member relationships to form one with another. My sense is that in Israel it's very different. And it's sort of ironic because you would think, you know, we're going home to the Jewish, you know, to the Jewish homeland, and undoubtedly there are so many more shuls there than there are here. But my sense is that, you know, the community operates on a very different level. I'm not even sure what my question is. My question is, number one, do you agree? And I guess, you know, for me personally, what I find a little frustrating for myself, because of, as you asked before, you know, where could I possibly see, how could I see my own, you know, career evolving one day? But really just on behalf of the Jewish people, you know, I feel that that's something very special, which may be lacking and missing, and perhaps that's unfortunate, or maybe not. Maybe you've been there 3 years already and you can say, no, it's better than you'd think.
So all right, I'd like to answer your question and also tie it into a question that I see was forwarded to us, which is really connects in a very beautiful way. What you're really asking, I think, is, does the synagogue serve as the same communal function as it does in America, as a hub of Jewish life and as a hub of Jewish relationship? The answer is it does not. It hasn't for decades, and there's a very real reason for that. And that is that in America and in other diaspora communities, the synagogue is the place where you touch your Jewish identity. It is the place where you touch being Jewish, whether it's the synagogue, whether it's the community center, whether it's the federation, whether it's the school. Those are the places you go. You then leave those places and you go into a secular world. You go into a non-Jewish world. You go into a world which is filled with people that are not part of your family and not part of your tribe. In Israel, you're in a Jewish country. So therefore, you don't feel you need the synagogue to be that hub, that place that you're going to retreat to for that injection of Jewishness, for that injection of Jewish identity and community and belonging, which is unfortunate, because the synagogue model that we have in America could be very, very worthwhile in Israel, could be that kind of community center, that kind of place, because the truth is, although it's a Jewish country, and although you feel Jewish when you're walking through the street, the synagogue could really re-energize what that connection should mean and what it should mean religiously. Having said that, there are changes that, with the influx of people coming in from the outside, and this ties into a question that was raised. I'll just quote it. How are Americans and others making a difference in day-to-day culture within Israel? How strong is the voice of others entering the land and making Aliyah examples, please? So the answer is, the more people that come from a particular background and from a particular community, the greater their voice becomes, and the greater the opportunity for them to create institutions that will mirror their contribution to Jewish life. And because there have been people coming from the diaspora to Israel, you are finding in some communities synagogues that are taking that role, that are becoming much more communal, that are becoming much more involved in creating community. Rabbis are undergoing, there are organizations that are teaching rabbis to follow what they consider to be the American model of being more involved in the community, not just being in the traditional Israeli role of a Shabbat rabbi and a teacher, but also a pastor, also reaching out to the community. And you find that more of those communities are beginning to develop. And I think that that is not just a paradigm for the creation of synagogue communities or this particular phenomenon, but it's a paradigm for the kinds of contributions that can be made by Olim when they move to Israel. You have to do it carefully. You can't come and say, we know better. You got to remember, when you move to Israel, especially when you move at an age like mine, you're meeting up with people that have sacrificed much more to be there than you have. Their children have been in the army, et cetera, although I do have 2 families living there in addition to myself now, 2 of my children. But properly said, properly done, properly working within the system, yes, you can have an impact and you can change the scene and you can make a contribution. And the contribution, I'll say and this is true for English Jewry, it's true for French Jewry, but knowing about American Jewry, the contribution that American Jewry can make to Israel, if its numbers grow and it finds its voice, can be very, very significant. Because we in America, one of the things that we have is that although we are denominational, we're not black and white. In other words, there are grays, there are shades of gray. There's a lot more nuance in American Jewry, I think, than in Israeli Jewry. And that nuance, that kind of ability, as you said, to accept other people, to talk to other people, to find ways to deal with other people from different backgrounds, is something that I think the American Jewish community could contribute to the state of Israel in a very real way. I saw there was one other question that one of our chairmen asked us, I think, which is whether COVID has made a difference in Aliyah. And I'll just say that the news here in Israel is that COVID is increasing Aliyah tremendously. Not that I'm happy about COVID, but I'm very saddened by its effects and by what it's caused to the community at large. But yes, apparently there are more Olim to Israel now than in the past. Nefesh B'Nefesh has reported that they have many more requests and much more interest. And part of it may be because of what's happening both with COVID and other events here in America at this time.
Yeah, I was deeply inspired several months ago when I was hearing from people that basically, I mean, again, it was very distressing on many levels to know that people were not able to travel to Israel. And it still obviously is something which is highly restricted. But it seemed as if, if you're looking for a loophole, there was one point where the only way that you can, actually cross the border is by making Aliyah, which at the time made me cry. I just thought that was, so poetic, and it's just so beautiful, that, there was a time, there was obviously a time not all that long ago where Jews couldn't cross that border, to save their life, and now, it was really the one and only way, that you can convince the Israeli government to let you come, and that is, I'm coming home to stay. And it was,
See that Ariella, or one of the organizer panel, is raising a question to both of us, to all panelists. What age of people do you see making Aliyah these days? What help and guidance is there for new Olim and residents of Israel? I think people of all ages are making Aliyah. I agree with Rabbi Rothwax. It is kind of frightening when we think about the fact that we live in a time where we're seeing the realization of a dream, and so many of us, including myself, it took me till age 65 to make Aliyah. are not jumping and running to go to Israel. And there are reasons for that, and there are practical reasons for that. But I do believe that we're seeing young men and women coming as Chayalim Bodedim, coming as lone soldiers. We're seeing retirees such as I call myself a semi-retiree. I'm not ready to retire. We see ourselves with, people of our age coming, my age coming. We now, in terms of the help, Nefesh B'Nefesh does a wonderful job. Nefesh B'Nefesh helps in manifold ways to help the initial stages of Aliyah. At the same time, I have to warn you, and warn anybody, that it can be a daunting task. There is a good deal of red tape, of things that you have to do, but from what I understand, it's much, much, much easier to make Aliyah on the technical level today because of Nefesh B'Nefesh and other organizations. The real challenge will not be the technical issues. The real challenge will be your expectations. Don't come here and expect everybody to dance and sing the Hora around you. Yes, there will be those who will say, wow, you made Aliyah, how wonderful. And there will be those who will look at you and say, okay, now what are you doing? What are you doing for me next? Or, that's nice, but we've been here a long time. And rightfully so, and rightfully so. We're coming to a country that they've built on their shoulders. We want to help build it now, but you have to come with a degree of humility, I think. You have to come with a degree of humility and at the same time, a degree of pride. I'm choosing to come, I want to be part, and I want to make my contribution. And if you approach it the right way, you can. And what I found personally, and I'll say this, Rabbi Rothwax, to you, is that I find myself busy, thank God. Speaking, there are audiences that are interested in hearing what an old rabbi from I got the gray beard, just got a black beard, want to say, writing. Is it the same as it was when I was a rabbi in the States? It's not, it's different, but it's still very fulfilling. And in some ways, more fulfilling.
And I imagine you probably still have, I don't know if I can call them former congregants. You're still the rabbi emeritus and a rabbi to many of the congregants for life. But either when you were here or now, since you've made Aliyah, if you have members who approach you and turn to you and ask you for your advice, whether or not they should be going, what sort of considerations do you as a rabbi have when advising and guiding people? Is there ever a point where you look at a family and say, listen, given the situation for you and your family at the moment, I would advise against making Aliyah at this point in time. This is something that you should be very concerned about, or do you just sort of help people think it through and say, listen, it's the decision you got to own, and good luck?
I think you're framing them at two extremes, and I'm going to throw the question back at you as well, because you're involved in counseling people towards Aliyah. I don't think that I would turn and say you can't come. I would turn and say, unless one of the issues, there might be medical issues or medical concerns or things of that kind, but in general, I don't think I would say you can't come. What I would say is you have to come honestly. You have to come with a recognition of the fact that you're moving to a foreign country. It's not America. There are going to be differences. One of the differences that I find is the medical care, and something that I've had to, because I'm a hypochondriac at times. So and as the rabbi in Englewood, New Jersey, I had doctors at my beck and call, and now I'm just another Israeli citizen working the system. So it's a very different experience. You got to come recognizing that things are going to be different. And you've got to come recognizing, again, as I said, you're coming. It's a wonderful thing. Don't expect everybody to jump up and down and scream hooray. They will be pleased that you're there. They'll be pleased that you come. Find a way to fit in. Find a way to make a difference. You'll be frustrated at times. You'll be upset at times, but come with open eyes. And if, upon consideration, recognizing the difficulties, this isn't the right time for you or your family, then that's okay. As Rabbi Rothwax, you said so beautifully, find ways to start the process, to think about it, to speak about it with your children as choices that they might make. 2 of my children preceded me with their families in making Aliyah. There are ways to do it and recognize it isn't for everybody. It isn't for everybody, and think it through carefully. I understand, though, that you've had to do this often too. Would you agree with that assessment, or?
Yes, I would agree. In general, it is my style. I try to help advise and guide people to the best of my ability. But when it comes to most personal decisions, I try to impress upon people the importance of sort of, owning the decision and be prepared, to celebrate or to, I don't want to say suffer the consequences in this case, but people, it's a very, very personal decision. And one that people need to own entirely. I have been concerned. There have been several situations where I have seen people who've really struggled here financially, not been able to establish themselves, and after trying to get their feet on the ground here, decide that sort of the easiest way to solve their problems is to move to Israel. And I've been concerned at times, and I've explained to them that if that's why you're going, you may want to, take a little more time to think the decision through and the process through, and make sure that, that you will, in fact, find the sort of success that you're struggling to find here. I get we're almost out of time, but there is a question here, which hopefully we'll see how long it takes to answer this question. But I have a feeling this may be, maybe your parting words for us, because we're looking once again for sort of a personal reflection, and one that will hopefully leave us all, with a sense of inspiration and curiosity, and perhaps again, each and every one of us in our own way. Can close our eyes, if not literally, sort of figuratively at the moment, and imagine, could that be me? The question that is asked of you is, what did you feel when you deplaned in Israel for the first time after making Aliyah?
Aside from tired, it really was an extraordinary feeling. And you have to remember, as I started, when we began, I said that, I was sort of pushed into this a little bit. But by the time we went, I was on board. And when we realized, it wasn't just when we deplaned, that Nefesh B'Nefesh took you right away to a place where you got your Teudat Zehut, where you got your Israeli identity card. And to hold in your hand an identity card that said that you are now living in Israel, that you'd now come back to the land that you had learned about all your life, that you, I'm getting chills, and I don't get this emotional usually in this way, that you're now part of this experiment, because that's what it is. This amazing enterprise of a coming home after thousands and thousands of years. And now you're not just an onlooker. Now you're not just someone coming to visit. Now you're not just someone to, who's going to bring a mission and do all those very, very important things which American Jews should do. But you're now going to be an insider. And it may take a little while for everybody else to realize that you're an insider, but you're now an insider. You now live here. You're now going to vote. You're now part of the citizenry. I mean, to see children growing up in this country, in Israel, to see how they are growing up differently, and their values. I see it in my own grandchildren, the values that they have. To see to sense that you're now part of this historic event. There's no way to put that into words. And Yeah, and it carries you through. You see, that's the thing. It carries you through. It carries you through the frustrations. It carries you through the the times that you get upset with the Israelis who pushed you a bit. It carries you through because, you know, as I said, I think that's when I froze. I said they'll be the first ones to push you, but they'll be the first ones to pick you up when you fall. It's that you're now part of this family, and that you're not just an onlooker. And there are really no words to describe that. There are no words to describe that. It's just it's part of being part of history.
You reminded me that I remember hearing a few years ago from Moshe Tarragon. I think he quoted his Rebbe Rabban Lichtenstein, that the difference between living in Israel and being, a supportive Jew from Chutz La'aretz, it's like the difference between being a spectator at a sporting event or being on the field playing the game, which is a very powerful and fitting metaphor. And you sort of said, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a spectator, or do you want to be, out there playing? The most important question I left for last. Over the past 5 months, I've been, for the most part, in the very seat I'm sitting in right now. This has become, my central location here. And other than Shabbos and Yom Tov and weddings, I have not put on a tie once, which has been the one personal benefit. I'm wondering, Rabbi Golden, do you ever put on a tie anymore now that you've made Aliyah? And what's it like? What is it like being able to basically wake up in the morning and dress a little more casually? That must be a little bit of a relief for you, having worn a suit. I don't think I ever saw you as a rabbi in my years here, not, dressed appropriately every day.
Appropriately, okay.
Well, professionally and appropriately for the part.
The answer is, I remember someone in Potomac, where I was a rub before Englewood, saying to me one day at a barbecue, "Hey, Rabbi, you have a neck." So the answer is that I have been wearing a tie on Shabbos, but I haven't been wearing a tie during the week. And I have a feeling that when I go back now, I may not even wear it on Shabbos either, because I'm pretty much the only one who's doing that. So yes, there's a certain relaxation that comes with being in the place where we are, and it's wonderful. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and a pleasure. I tell the Federation, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi Golden. It's also been a personal honor, a privilege, and thank you to all those who've joined us, and hopefully this is a conversation that we will continue either here or hopefully on the other side of the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Thank you, Rabbi Golden and Rabbi Rothwax, for this very interesting, thought-provoking conversation. I'm sure we could have continued it for much longer. And thank you for the generosity of your time, your expertise, and your thoughtful personal reflections. My name is Rena Donin-Schlussel, and I am Vice President of Planning and Allocations at Federation and co-chair of tonight's program with Bruce. As Bruce mentioned in his introduction, Federation is dedicated to providing programming and engagement opportunities for the community, and we hope that you will join us again for future programs. And also, I will ask you to join me and Bruce and others and support Federation by making a donation. These are particularly challenging times, and your support is critical to allow Federation to do its important work for our Jewish community, and to allow us to continue to provide quality programs like this one to you. To donate, please go to jfnnj.org/donate. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you again to Rabbi Golden and Rabbi Rothwax. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone, and Laila Tov. Good night.